This is a Media Lab podcast. Welcome to Putting Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. So we're in the intermission part of the season, and I thought it was a great time to have Joel DeCandio back onto the podcast. He was last here in the Anyone Can Whistle season. If you're unaware, he is the co-host, along with Madeline Batteri, of the Sondheim Project. I really encourage you to check out that YouTube channel. They've talked with Paul Gimignani and Michael Strobin. It's fantastic. But on that episode where they talked about me and my town, I discovered how much of a fan Joel is of Anyone Can Whistle, like to an obnoxious degree. So it only made sense for him to come back on to discuss the recently released album from J Records called Anyone Can Whistle, the First Complete Recording. It was in celebration of Sondheim's 90th birthday, but has actually been in production since the 90s. We'll get into that in the episode. And let's do that quickly. But first, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make this show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. I also need to give a huge thank you to the God That's Good tier from Patreon, the Triumphant Quartet, Jack, Todd, Barry, and Carrie. We don't need plotting along this week because there's no plot to get to. Let me go thank some sponsors, and then when we'll return, it'll be me talking about the first complete recording of Anyone Can Whistle with Joel DeCandio. Putting It Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Putting It Together is brought to you by the Calgary Foundation. Whether it's funding anti-racism programs, addiction recovery, or food hampers for the hungry, for 65 years, the Calgary Foundation has proudly supported the charitable community to address some of Calgary's biggest challenges. Now, during this period of unprecedented urgent needs, Calgary Foundation renewed its commitment to building a healthy, vibrant, giving, caring, and resilient community. If you're a registered charity looking for a grant, a professional advisor creating a giving plan for your client, or a donor wanting to give back to community, discover a wealth of resources at calgaryfoundation.org and learn more about their work through Calgary Foundation's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. This episode of Putting It Together is also brought to you by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider in Alberta, offering internet, electricity, and natural gas with low rates, awesome service, and profit sharing with local charities. In Alberta, you get to choose who to buy your internet, electricity, and natural gas from. Park Power has low overhead, which in turn allows them to offer low competitive rates. Reach out for a no obligations comparison by emailing estimates at parkpower.ca. If you decide to switch, it's easy. It's really just a change to your billing, and you can feel good knowing you are helping to give back to our communities with your utilities bills. Learn more at parkpower.ca.
There won't be trumpets or bolts of fire to say he's coming. No Roman candles, no angels' choir, no sound of distant drumming.
Joel DeCandio, thank you so much for returning back to the show.
Thank you. I'm super excited.
This is, your return to the show, much like this album we're about to talk about, is a long time coming. You did not have to wait 20 years in order for it to actually happen. I guess where I just want to start, because you possibly may be the person that I know that is like the most enthusiastic about Anyone Can Whistle. So I want to just start there as a base level. What is it about Anyone Can Whistle that is like, this is my show?
It's just me. I'm like the one person in the fan club.
Yeah.
I I don't know. I think part of it is I discovered it when I was in high school. Well, I discovered like pretty much all of Sondheim's musicals when I was in high school. That was like a big kind of discovery time for me.
I like, by the way, just to reveal something to the audience, before we pushed record there, you were mentioning how like in high school you were driving around listening to the A Little Night Music original Broadway cast. I was like, I also did that. And I think we're like the only two people that probably were teenagers like jamming out to A Little Night Music.
It was very uncool. I used to go to like the public library and just take out cast recordings. And so I was a big fan of the Anyone Can Whistle one because it was Angela Lansbury and Harry Guardino and Lee Remick. And I had recently discovered Lee Remick from the Follies concert. So I was kind of obsessed with her. I thought she was so cool. And I'd always loved Angela Lansbury because I grew up with obviously Beauty and the Beast, but more importantly to me, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, which was...
Oh my God. Like, we should be better friends because I'm not even joking. There was, my parents had three basically movies that they had recorded off of like probably like The Wonderful World of Disney or something. Anyways, they recorded off of TV, and I had Mary Poppins, I had Flight of the Navigator, which also no one knows about, and then Bedknobs and Broomsticks. And I watched Bedknobs and Broomsticks, I'm not even joking, like probably hundreds of times growing up. Like I know that movie front to back, basically.
Like TMI, but like I could still like tell you all of the spells. Like, right. I had them so memorized as a kid.
Glowworm fire, firefly light. Well, isn't that pretty?
Is that?
But yeah, so I just like, I was so fascinated by the recording because they were all in it. And I knew that it had such a short life on Broadway. I thought that was crazy that it ran, what, 7 days or something?
Yeah, something like that. 9 performances, 7 days.
Something like that's still, and I know there are shows that have had that short of a lifespan, but it's still so mind-blowing to me because I just can't imagine putting all of that money and all of that rehearsal and time into a show and then a weekend saying, okay, it's not happening. We're going to close it.
Shut it down, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was it was such a fascinating thing to me in general. And it's a very intellectual show. And I not that I was like a very intellectual child. I'm sure I didn't really understand it, but I was trying to, and so it was like cool for me to try and figure out what that show was about and what was going on. And then I just was crazy about the music. Like some of those songs, the Miracle Song and Me and My Town are just two of my favorite. I'm obsessed with them. With So Little to Be Sure Of, I used to play and sing on the piano all the time as a kid. I thought it was so beautiful. Anyone Can Whistle, There Won't Be Trumpets. There's a lot of really good just like standalone numbers in that show. I think more than you get in most Sondheim. Like there's a lot of really good numbers in that show.
Well, I think that's where the conflict happens for me because not that I necessarily advise this, but I have watched a lot of bootlegs of Anyone Can Whistle, of like all the different performances of it. Like you, like I love some of the individual songs, like at least two of them for sure are like in my like top, I don't know, 10, 20 Sondheim songs. I like them that much. Watching the show, it's like anytime that they're not singing, it's like, oh, this is a bit of a drag. But the actual music from this show is so good. And I agree with you. It really is the beginning of like really hearing that Sondheim sound. Like, of course, this is his first one that's music and lyrics that were on Broadway, but you can really start to see him really forming what would become like so concrete later on.
Well, so it's interesting that you say this. So before I hopped on here this morning, I woke up and I was still lying in bed and I just like played the recording and listened to it all the way through. And then I grabbed, I don't know if you know this book, it's called Sondheim on Music.
Yeah.
By Mark Horowitz. Mark was like a big mentor of mine when I lived in DC. I flipped through the book and they don't really talk in depth about Anyone Can Whistle in it, but there's a couple moments where he mentioned it. And Sondheim was saying that anyone can whistle. He said, I found my voice in whistle and my voice was accepted in company. And so that's, I think, what's also so fascinating to me because it's so Sondheim. It's so Sondheim just doing what he does.
Yeah, like it's his first, time doing those like intricate like story songs. You have those like great ballads. There's just some beautiful, beautiful stuff in here. I guess to go through like the history of the recording of Anyone Can Whistle, miraculously, there is a recording of the original Broadway cast. I don't know how much of this is like legend is actually truth, but I think it's something like they had like 3 hours in the studio. Like it was a very rush, which is why apparently, and I never knew this until I did some research on this just recently. There's a song that actually Angela Lansbury trips up on her words. And it stays in the recording.
Yes, and I can't think of which song it is, but I know what you're talking about.
And it's just because we don't have money for retakes. So, sorry, the screw up that you just did is going to be on this recording kind of forever. What is it? I think it's Guittard Lieberson is the gentleman's name. He was a guy of Capitol Records, if I'm not making this up. But he was like this big proponent of show music and loved Sondheim stuff from like West Side Story, and was like, we're going to record it, and I don't care. We're just going to record this. And he was with Sondheim up until like A Little Night Music, because he passed away fairly shortly afterwards, but was really the reason why all of Sondheim's early stuff was recorded in the first place. Because A Little Night Music was almost never recorded either, and he really fought for it to have a recording done. We have that original cast album, miraculous, even more so because there's a song, There Won't Be Trumpets, which was cut from the show, which becomes kind of a very popular song in cabaret acts. So a cut song almost becomes like the standout hit from Anyone Can Whistle.
Well, it's so funny too, because I believe they cut it because Lee Remick, there's a monologue leading up, which you hear on the new recording, and It would like stop the show every night. So there was like no point in stopping the show and then having a song. Like that was, the monologue was the highlight point. So they cut it. But in every production after, it's just in it because the song is so good and everyone loves the song. They're just like, well, we have to have the song in the show. And like, thank goodness, it's a great song.
It's great. Yeah. And then even though there has been a bunch of like revivals, the only other recording of Anyone Can Whistle is the 1995 AIDS benefit concert with Bernadette Peters and Madeline Kahn and Scott Bakula, of course. And then Angela Lansbury is the narrator in that version as well. So those are really the only 2 recordings that people have had. And that benefit concert does have some of the spoken bits, so you get a little bit of understanding.
Yeah, more of the story. Yeah, it's hard from the original Broadway cast. You're like, what is going on in this show?
I defy anyone. I said this back during the Anyone Can Whistle season. I started my Anyone Can Whistle by just purchasing 2 songs from iTunes, which was Whistle a Little to Be Sure Of and There Won't Be Trumpets. And if those are the only 2 songs you know from this show, it's like, that is not the show. Like, those are very specific moments.
I tell you the plot. Like, I know the plot in my head, but I'm fairly certain I could not explain it.
Right. Like, for so many shows, you can at least do a very, like, basic one sentence. Like, this is what the show is, right? Like homicidal barber coming back to avenge being like put out of London, or it's like a turn of the century sex comedy set in the London like countryside. It's like, okay, like Anyone Can Whistle is like, it's like a miracle happens in a town and a mayoress is trying to take credit for it, but then there's like an insane asylum, and like there's like, it just gets so convoluted so quickly to really try and explain just even a basic what this show is about. It's pretty hard to do so. But then also in the 90s, they started to record this album that we're about to talk about that was only released like a month ago. So what do you know about this? How did you first hear about this album that they were making?
I mean, it was so long. It was I was in high school, so it was like well over a decade ago for me. And I don't remember how I first like came across it or knew about it, but I have just like always known that it existed and that it was going to be released one day, supposedly. And I was, and I was so excited for it because it was people that I loved, Julia McKenzie, Maria Friedman, John Barrowman. I had just like discovered John Barrowman because I would watch the Putting It Together concert. When I was in high school, and Julia McKenzie I knew from the London Follies recording and the London Into the Woods. And then Maria Friedman, obviously, from everything she's done. And so it was just such a fascinating cast to me. I was also had this weird obsession when I was in high school with London cast recordings of musicals because they were always a little weird. There was always like something strange going on.
Yeah.
It's like they just do their own interpretation. And so I was always really fascinated by them because I just liked hearing different interpretations. So the idea that this was all West End stars and coming out of London and that it was a complete recording was just so like cool and fascinating to me. So I don't remember exactly how I found out about it, but I have just been following it for years, hoping that they would finish. Because essentially they recorded it. I think there are two different conductors on it. They recorded it and then didn't finish recording it and then picked it up later and continued recording it. So I'm sure like the chorus probably has different people. There's different people in the orchestra, but eventually it was completed, after like it was recorded over a number of years. And then it just sat on a shelf. Like they didn't master, they didn't mix it. And it just for years, and they just kept saying, "Oh, we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it." And then I guess, COVID, they did.
Well, yeah, they finally had the opportunity to. Like, this is who's credited here is the National Symphony Orchestra, conducted by John Owen Edwards. Although it is from Don Walker's Orchestrations, that's who is like kind of credited on this. From doing, and then granted, I've only really read one article on this. From what I understand, they record basically the entire album in 1997 or somewhere in the late 90s at the very least. So we're talking like this is a very young John Barrowman. And then there is a bunch of like rights issues and like copyright things that they had to like hurdle through. And then they had to recast one of the actors and re-sing all those parts in 2013. So this is like a combination of two different recording sessions. Now, I think the kind of important part about this release too is that like Sondheim himself is like very enthusiastic about it. And let me tell you, he does not give praise unless he really wants to. He says, these are his exact words, the brilliance of this recording gives the show more energy and sparkle than it's ever had. And I actually kind of agree, even though like I do also love like Lee Remick and Angela Lansbury, but there's something about this orchestration when I was listening through to it, like it does give it that more jauntiness to it.
Oh yeah, I will say I have always loved the original recording and the concert recording, and they're so different. I mean, those casts could not be more different. But once I listened to this recording, I was like, oh, done. This is my favorite recording of the show.
Yeah, it does finally seem like this is like the definitive version of Anyone Can Whistle.
And I hate saying that about recordings. I'm always like, you can have different but this one is just, it's so good. And the orchestra sounds incredible. And that's, I don't know if you've listened. So J Records, which put out this recording, this is a big thing that they do. They'll record like full length, like complete recordings of musicals, usually more classic musicals like The King and I. It's so random that Anyone Can Whistle got a full length. Yeah. I'm so happy it did. But it's always, it's generally always John Owen Edwards and the National Symphony Orchestra. And there's like a handful of people who are in the recording who are just like various characters who you hear on all the other recordings. They have
interesting. Okay.
People that they use. So it was cool to listen to this and be like, oh, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. Like I've just always heard them, on all the other complete recordings. But of all the complete recordings that J Records has put out, this is my favorite one because it is the one that feels the least like a studio cast album. Sometimes the studio cast albums can be a little stodgy. And this one is so alive. The orchestra sounds unreal. Like they just sound so good.
And for like, again, going back to like the actors that they have involved, of course, they're getting like great people to be involved with this, but it does kind of feel like they've been putting this show on for a few weeks and then come in to do the recording instead of like, we're just doing a recording session and you're coming in and singing your parts.
Yeah. And especially, I have to say my stand-up, my favorite of this recording is Julia McKenzie.
Yeah.
It's just
who's Cora, correct? Like that's who
she's Cora, and it's unreal to me what she is doing just with her voice and with her character. I can't imagine a more perfect like vocal recording of this character. And I can't imagine a better voice for the character because Julia McKenzie does, that vaudeville sound, that classical, like operatic sound, and then that gospel sound that she just throws in there like at random points, because there is like this like revival type music with the miracle song, and it's just mind blowing to me what she's doing with her voice.
And it's holier than thine. There's water in the lake, water in the river, water in the deep blue sea, and water in a rock, Lord, that's a miracle. Who's got the miracle? We. There's water that you parch, water that you walk on, water that you turn to wine. But water from a rock, Lord, what a miracle! This is a miracle that's divine, truly divine, really divine. The Lord said, let there be
Well, yeah, especially in like there's the cookie chase, right? And there's those like little operatic bits that they always have Cora sing, and those vocalizations. And even for me, it's like I know they're coming up, and she does a few different like interpretations of those lines. Like, oh, okay, that's a little bit new that I was not expecting.
Yeah, she's definitely. It's so interesting to be so used to Angela Lansbury and also Madeline Kahn, and then to hear Julia McKenzie, who she's just going all out vocally. It's insane. I think it's the end of Me and My Town is my favorite, where she goes up and she just like screams it, and it's so good. I think I played it on repeat, like just over and over and over. I had to stop listening to the album the first time I played it, and I just kept listening to the end of that song.
Yes. Where do you stand normally? We've actually been having this discussion on our season of A Little Night Music. For cast albums, like, do you actually enjoy the spoken bits on albums? Like, do you enjoy the albums that actually include the spoken bits?
It depends. It really depends. That's so funny that you said that, because I was thinking about this morning, because there is so much dialogue in this. Like, but I think it's important, because otherwise you really just don't know what is going on.
Yeah. So I kind of clocked it here. I think it's just under 2 hours, like the full, start to finish. Like it's a long album because of all the spoken bits that they're putting into there.
It's I don't know. It depends. I used to be obsessed with cast albums that had spoken dialogue, because I wanted to get as much of the show as possible. I really liked, when I listen to cast albums, I kind of like to listen from start to finish. So I really get the show. Like, that's just fun for me to have that time go by listening to that. I think in that sense, I do really like having the dialogue, but it really depends on how the dialogue's recorded, because sometimes it can be awkward. There is another recording of a Sondheim musical that has a lot of dialogue in it. And I actually know that you talked about it yesterday with your guest, because I don't know if I know your guest from yesterday.
Oh, really? Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. So we were texting the other night.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Asking me about night music recordings. And so I sent him some, and he was like, yeah, I have to do this podcast. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. I have to do one on Friday. And he was like, well, what's your podcast?
That's hilarious.
Yeah, we realized, but the revival recording of the show that you talked about yesterday, was it 2009 revival
yes.
or whatever. There's so much, I don't like the way it's recorded. The sound.
I forgot to bring it up. So this is so funny, because even though we're recording after Matt, who I was talking with, his episode's not coming up for like another month. So you're going to be going up like way before you guys.
Coming up first? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the weirdness of time. So I actually really like the orchestrations and the music from that 2009 revival of A Little Night Music. But you're right in that when the spoken bits come out, I don't know how they recorded them, but they come in so loud and aggressive. I'm just like, whoa, like you're like way up in my ears right now. Like, I don't know what it is.
Close mic'd or something.
Yeah.
But then when you record like the music, it's more of an expansive theatrical sound. And so it's weird to suddenly go from like this musical theater to suddenly like close mic, we're speaking right.
Yes.
You know?
I agree. Yeah. It's so weird. Yeah.
So it just, I guess my answer is it depends on how they record the dialogue.
Yeah. Like where I kind of fall on it is kind of like you said, if I'm getting into the musical for the first time, I actually do enjoy the spoken bits. Cause again, growing up, like this was really my first introduction to a lot of shows, not being able to see them, not really being able to watch them. So it's like the album is the album and I need to kind of know what's going on based on the music and like deducing what's going on. So the spoken bits can sometimes be really helpful for that. That being said, if I just want to listen, like I don't really want to have all those talking bits and I just want to listen to the music and like do that. So it really depends kind of on what mood I happen to be in at the time.
Yeah.
I know you've already mentioned like Miracle Song and some of the other ones. Are there other standout songs from this recording for you?
Well, definitely Me and My Town and Miracle Song. Just because of Julia Mackenzie. I just think I could talk about her all day. I think she's brilliant. She just absolutely blows. The things she does with her voice are insane to me. I don't know anyone else who does what she does. But I love hearing Maria sing There Won't Be Trumpets. And I love hearing John Barrowman sing anything. And I think he's so perfect in this role because he's so just like beautiful and suave and like just so smooth. And hearing him sing those, just like croon those songs, it's so perfect. You know, I think he's kind of like a perfect follow-up to Harry Guardino and then Scout Bakula. And
I like your how you say, unmistakable authenticity. It isn't how you say, it's what I see. We have the like, yes. The fling, yes. The play is the how you say is the thing, yes.
You know what's interesting? When I was doing some research, and maybe I just not go into forums, there seems to be like a very strong, I would say minority, but very strong minority who is very anti John Barrowman. And I am not one of those people, I should just point out. But it's like, it's very interesting because I also very much enjoy his singing voice. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Because I think Whistle a Little Be Sure Of actually has not been sung as well until this recording. I thought it's so
definitely
great.
the best sung Hapgood on recording.
With so little to be sure of, if there's anything at all, if there's anything at all, I'm sure of here and now and us together. All I'll ever be, I owe you. If there's anything to be, being sure enough of you makes me sure enough of me.
Yeah, and then even the like Come Play With Me, which includes one of my favorite Sondheim lyrics, is like, it's so, I don't know, I just love the way that their interplay is on that song is so fun, and I think it just brings like this fresh like comedy and sweetness to it. It just really works for me. In a way, like when I found out that most of this was recorded in 97, I was a bit shocked because I was like, oh, like this feels very contemporary to me in a way that I guess not that the 90s are like so far out of the realm, but you know what I mean? There's a sound to like 90s recordings that doesn't necessarily get brought over to modern day.
It's interesting. And I think a big part of that too is also, we had talked about how a lot of times in studio recordings, they can sound a little stodgy. They're not quite the same as like cast recordings, but I think one of the things that worked really well for them here was that they used like West End stars. They used musical theater performers instead of, sometimes they'll do more classical performers, and sometimes it can just be a little stiff. And I think the performers that they used in this recording, they're all Sondheim interpreters, and they all, I think, have a love for this music, and I think it really comes across.
Yeah, to the point, like whoever it was, I mean, I'm sure it was like partly the musical director and everyone else involved, but like really like the interpretation of these lyrics. I mean, Sondheim is always credited with being very actor friendly. Like you're able to act through the songs and the word choices that they give to you, but I feel you can really hear that through this. Because this is like what they call like the full recording, there is also like this interstitial music, which I'm a big fan of too, because there's like the Act 2 and Act 3 openings. There's like some of the playoff music that they do after the songs. And I don't know, like I enjoy all that stuff too, because it's like, yes, this feels like I'm actually in the theater and they're changing the set around as they're, playing this on, and then we're back into the action sort of thing. Talking about the spoken bits, is there any of like the spoken bits specifically that were either new to you or like, oh wow, like I'm glad that they included this?
Really happy that they included Faye's monologue before.
Yes, like the full monologue is there.
Full monologue. It's so good. You really hear, I mean, with all the dialogue, you really get an understanding of what is going on, because at least you don't get that in the Broadway recording. In the Carnegie Hall concert, you at least have Angela Lansbury narrating telling what's going on. But here you can really, I had such a better understanding of the show when I listened to this recording, because I could actually hear what they were talking about, what was going on between the characters. Everything made so much more sense to me.
This is a free town and a free county and a free state and a free country, and I'm a free woman with a free mouth. And if you say no to my cookies, I will open up that mouth and I will talk. And I am telling you here and now that when I talk long and loud.
While they have been
talking about like narrators, I mean, there's the cool thing too about this is that because this was recorded back in the 90s, they were able to get Arthur Laurence to be the narrator who introduces the album. And I thought that was such a cool like little addition. It's so great to have the author of the piece, or one of the authors of the piece, be able to introduce the show to us.
I didn't realize that as I was listening to it. And as I was listening through it, I was, for whatever reason, maybe it was just hearing his voice or something, I thought, who's the narrator on this? Like, and I didn't guess that it was Arthur. I didn't know who it was, but I was curious, and so I looked it up, and I was like, "Wow, that's so cool."
Now, we have been fairly glowingly positive. Is there anything in here that doesn't work for you?
I don't know. I don't have anything. I don't have anything.
You don't have any notes? You didn't take any notes?
I have no notes. I really love this recording. I think it's so good. Do you have notes?
Not really. Like even the criticisms that I was seeing online, honestly, it would be me like really reaching or really trying to find something to be nitpicky about in this case. Am I going to sit down and listen to this whole 2-hour album again? Maybe not, but I'm definitely going to like pick out the bits that I love and then re-listen to them over and over again. So there's that as a positive.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I will say it was really interesting to hear the extended, like the ballet sequences.
Yeah, which I've never, I don't think, been recorded.
No, and I don't think I had really an understanding of, I knew there were extended musical sequences in the show, but I didn't know to that extent. And it's interesting to hear because they're really such kind of a product of the time that, like, the period of musical theater that Anyone Can Whistle came from, because we don't do that anymore. There's no extended ballet sequences being written into Dear Evan Hansen, or anything like. And so it's so interesting to hear that, because it is such an old school musical theater thing to have. We're gonna have this like 15-minute long ballet sequence where they're just dancing. So it's crazy to hear that. And it was also interesting because listening to it, I could really understand why audiences didn't like it when it premiered, because I can't imagine. And when did this show premiere? Is it in the 60s?
I want to say 63, 64, somewhere around there.
I can't imagine an audience in the 60s with all the musicals that were happening at that time going to see this and being like,
well, yeah. In one of the write-ups I read, like, I don't think they opened up in the same year, but it was basically, this opened up literally across the street from the original Hello, Dolly. And so it's like, of course people are going to go and see Hello, Dolly.
Like, they just couldn't be any more different. This couldn't be any different. This couldn't be more different than the musicals that were being written at that time. And it feels so ahead of its time. And when I listen to it now, I think like, wow, especially with everything that we've been going through in the last handful of years and just socially and politically, it feels so much more of this time.
Yes, I'm so glad you actually brought this up before we wrapped up, because that is the biggest thing for me, is that even when the season that we covered Anyone Can Whistle, I brought that up. It's like, oh, there's some stuff here that feels relevant. And it has seemingly only become more relevant over the last few years, because there's certain lines in here. It's like, oh my gosh, like, this is like directly talking about stuff we're struggling with and like trying to have like national conversations about, about following false leaders, about like, there's just all this stuff that's wrapped up into it. Like, my gosh, like, this really does feel like they were trying to push, and they were just a bit too early for it to really hit the way that they really wanted it to.
It's so funny because I hit play this morning and it opens with, Arthur Laurence narrating, and he's talking about the money situation in the town and how it's kind of held by, these specific people. Yeah. And I was like, wow, this is just like, especially, what was it? It's just yesterday, the stock market thing with everything. And I was like,
I know, it's like,
that's
how they remarket this. It's like sometimes new musical GameStop, and then it's just Anyone Can Whistle.
And it's just Anyone Can Whistle. Yeah, honestly, it feels, I couldn't think of another musical that is just more appropriate to what is going on right now.
I'm pretty sure that this is going to be like the third time I've brought this up here recently. But are you familiar with it was a Netflix movie that got released a few months ago called I'm Thinking of Ending Things? Have you seen this movie?
I remember seeing the commercials for it.
So it was done by this guy named Charlie Kaufman, who I'm a big fan of. But somewhat of a spoiler, near the end of that movie, they actually do a dream ballet sequence, which I think is hilarious. Even though it's not a musical at all, but it's literally a dream ballet that they do at the very end of the movie. And when I watched that, I'm like, you know what? If there's anyone that I would like to see try and adapt Anyone Can Whistle, it would be Charlie Kaufman, who could literally just break it apart and then like re-put it back together and be like, let's get rid of all the bits that don't really work, keep the songs that do. What I'm really pushing is for Hollywood to be like, yes, let's greenlight an Anyone Can Whistle movie. No one will go and see, but I will go and see.
No one will go and see. Yeah, exactly.
Joel, thank you so much for joining me here today. I guess if people wanted to stay in contact with you, is there an easy way they can do so online?
Instagram, Joel DeCandio, at Joel DeCandio, JoelDecandio. That's the only social media I'm on. But I'm on it all the time because I have nothing else to do right now.
I have to say, for me, what I love about your Instagram, especially your Instagram stories, it keeps me abreast of like current events without me wanting to rip out my hair. That's what I found out with Twitter. It's too much like doom scrolling on Twitter. But for you, it's like, here's like the highlights. I'm just gonna point out.
So funny that you said that. Someone messaged me the other day and was like, I get all my news from your Instagram. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's how I stay informed. Thank Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, and you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thanks to the Alberta Podcast Network, the Calgary Foundation, and to Park Power this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we'll have one more episode in our intermission. I get a chance to simply talk with a director of an upcoming Sondheim project. That's all I can say for right now. As always, a big thanks to the great Chris Taniguchi who designed the podcast artwork, and to Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.
Come with me, Faye.
My cookies need someone to take care of them.
That's an excuse. Where's your wig?
You wouldn't want me like that.
4 wives. They all tried to change me. The girls who don't are the girls you don't marry.